Okay, well, welcome to this live stream today. I thought that we'd go on a little different route with some of the things we're going to be doing with live streams this month. I want to do a few more of them, and this is one of them. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the new Mac Studio, but also just get into Logic a little bit. And we're going to try to do a little bit longer streams just to go over some stuff. And if you're watching this live, then for sure, throw some questions or comments in the chat because I'd like this to be more interactive. Otherwise, what's the point of doing a live stream? But I thought I would start by going over some of this announcement from yesterday with the new Mac Studio, and it's clearly something that Apple thinks is a value for Logic users, partially because they referenced that in the actual presentation yesterday, and some of the marketing and things on the website, as you can see behind me here. That is, Logic. That's part of what they're showing here is this Logic as one of the main reasons for this particular new computer. And of course, that extends into things like Final Cut and using things from third-party developers like Adobe and all of that. But this certainly is one of those really interesting new things that's out there because of the power, and I would even say the affordability. Even though this is not necessarily a cheap Mac, this is certainly a relatively affordable new computer for those of us who want to use it. So just looking at the price for a second, let's look at this because there's the two main options. And if you've read anything about this, I'm not going to go too in depth, but the two main ones, the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra. The M1 Max, $2,000 for a really beefy computer, something that will handle most of what we need. And then the Ultra, of course, starting at $4,000. And so I think that that's a big chunk of money, $4,000 for a new computer. But if you're doing this professionally and you are doing big, maybe orchestral type projects or something, then this computer here is going to be expensive, but it's going to be really powerful. And so I think that there's something to be looked at here with this. For me, I'm currently using the M1, the original M1 Mac Mini, and I still haven't hit any walls. Now, I don't do any massive projects. I've seen some pretty massive projects out there. I tend to be on the smaller scale of that, or I end up doing some video type work and video editing and things, and it's worked really well for that. But I don't tend to multitask very much. I tend to just use one app at a time because that's what that particular computer really thrives at. It doesn't like to use, have a bunch of apps all kind of doing things simultaneously. And I think that the newer computers, these beasts of computers, are going to be better at that for sure. And so if that's a priority, then go up for it. However, the 10-core CPU, 24-core GPU, the 16-core neural engine with 32 gigs of unified memory, that's a pretty decent computer for $2,000. That being said, I got my Mac Mini M1 for like, $700 and something. And so it's definitely a lot cheaper than these. But I have an iPad Pro that has an M1 in it, and it's lightning fast, but I can't do things like run Logic on it. So there's certainly some stuff about that we'll be figuring out, and I'll be curious to see when people start getting these exactly what their experience is. But how does this tie into the topic of the video, which is why is Logic Pro the best? Well, think about this. Apple is releasing these new computers, and it's almost guaranteed that Logic Pro will work on this computer from day one the minute you unpack it. It's unlikely that something like Pro Tools is going to work from day one on this computer. In fact, it takes them like a year and a half sometimes to get up to the newest thing. And everyone's who runs Pro Tools is running on an operating system that is 1 or 2 versions behind. And perhaps in their minds, that's their way of feeling comfortable and secure so that they can feel like things are going to be reliable. But I never had any like serious reliability issues with Logic as a standalone unit on the new M1. I ran it on the new M1 from day one when those came out. And sure, there were every once in a while a few little bumps, but I was able to always run my sessions and open them up. And I would say the third-party effects and things are starting to catch up, but I run it in Rosetta mode most of the time still. And, it works great. Is that a big deal? Do we need our software to work on a new computer from day one? And I would say, no, you don't necessarily need that. But there's certainly something about having all of this innovation happening hardware-wise with Apple. They're clearly interested in making computers that are like massively powerful. And then having a piece of software that comes from the same company that's going to integrate and tie in a little bit better than some of these third-party things. And okay, so let's look at I got a couple comments coming in. First one, hello from the Netherlands. How you doing? It's a snowy day here in Colorado. We're having another one of our March snowstorms. Probably just going to get a few inches of snow, but certainly it's always fun to get a little bit more. And then using Studio One for quite some time. I like Studio One. I think Studio One is an example of a software that came out a number of years ago now, but when it first came out, it was like a new code to a certain extent. It was something new. Using the new things instead of always building on something that's been around forever. Like Logic is a perfect example of something that's been around for so many years, and they've always been updating it, but never just like started over and gotten rid of some of the bugs that are just there. Studio One bypassed a little bit of that, but there's a few things that Studio One just doesn't do, so I can't I don't think I'll ever switch over to it. One of those things is, of course, surround sound or multi-channel audio. They might add that. Last version I looked at this past year didn't have surround sound or anything, and spatial audio is really cool, and it does some things, and Studio One just can't do it. So for me, that's a huge drawback. And the other one would be the drummer track. I like how the drummer track works and all the percussion stuff in Logic, and Studio One does a really poor job at any of that. Otherwise, Studio One's amazing, and I think it's really reliable, and the mastering functionality in Studio One is something that we used to have with Logic when we had some of the mastering software that came out, and they got rid of all of that. What was that? I'm having a brain fart. I can't remember what it's called right this second. That's how long it's been. Somebody will remind me, I'm sure. But we had the whole suite of things with Logic. We had Soundtrack Pro, and we had the impulse response utility, which is still there. It's just hidden inside Logic now. And a few other things that came with this. Anyway. So I think you should switch, personally, but that's just me. Because I don't think that I think Logic still is outpacing Studio One in some of the key areas, which I think is really nice. It used to be Studio One was like, you can drag and drop everything. And it was true at the beginning. You could anything you were thinking of, I just want to move this over there, drag and drop, drag and drop. It was so easy to use. And now Logic and everybody else does the same thing. So they're all catching up to a certain extent. But Studio One now, the major flaws are more apparent. Another comment from Donkey Face Killer 1. I got a 2020 iMac with the Intel. Do you think they will drop support for Intel anytime soon? They're not going to drop support for it yet. But I mean, look around at what's happening. And mobile stuff has always been one of the key indicators, I think. So the iPad Air now has an M1 in it. That's like the light budget version of the iPad has the M1. And we now have the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio and the iMac. As soon as they do the Mac Pro and everything's switched over to M1 or whatever comes next, because right now, I mean, M1 is the thing still. They might come out with an M2, but it's going to be same architecture type thing. But they'll give you like 5 years or something, or 10 years support. I mean, they'll support stuff, but the future now is clearly all of the silicon stuff. Let's see, a couple more comments. Is there a way to play a sample like a phrase and change the pitch during the phrase without re-triggering the sample at the beginning? Yes. I mean, there definitely, if you load something into like the sampler and that pitch engine that's in there, you can change the pitch using like the normal pitch wheel and it will bend it in the middle of the note. So I guess I don't know if you're asking something different than that, but let me know, because anytime you put it into a sampler and you bend the pitch wheel, it's going to bend the pitch of that. There are some cool things in Alchemy which are more advanced. For instance, you can actually change the speed or the pitch independently in Alchemy in the middle of a sample, and that is super cool. I mean, you can play things forwards and backwards. That's all part of the new engine and logic, which separates the linear timeline from actual playback of sounds. That's been around for a few years now, but it's pretty cool stuff. It lets designers of plugins do some really interesting things by loading things in the RAM and things like that. Another comment, wish Logic had easy way of doing parallel processing. That Studio. Yeah, and actually, yes. I don't disagree with you. That is another one of Studio One's strengths, where you can like load things inside the plugin system and do parallel processing. The truth is, I almost always just do parallel processing with dynamics control anyway, or I just run them in a folder or a track stack and then do it that way. But let me go into Logic here for a second. With a compressor, which is where I do most of the parallel processing, there's the mix knob, so you can always just mix the input and the output together, and I think that that's a really elegant way to do any kind of compansion or New York style compression. So it is in here, it's just not nearly that. That is one of those things. There's a few things in Studio One, like a lot of the chord analysis and things which are better than anybody else. But the parallel processing is pretty ingenious, and I'm guessing it'll filter out to some of the other places, because I don't think you can copyright parallel processing at this point. And then let's see, is Logic great enough for composing and scoring? Yeah, and people do use it for that, for sure. I think that it's a really powerful tool. It's gotten more powerful. It used to be, the biggest limitation, of course, was running sample libraries and things at a large scale. And even Logic, we used to be able to offload processing by hooking up multiple computers together, like on a switch, or even directly to each other. And then you'd run like a node program on the second computer, and it would offload some of the processing. Pro Tools uses all of its special DSP cards and things. But now, like something with like the Mac Studio, you don't need anything. I mean, that thing is going to be able to run 1,000 tracks without even blinking. So, I mean, it's going to be pretty powerful. Plus, you can freeze tracks. Even if you don't have the top computer, you can freeze tracks and keep that you can keep the power in a more, contained place. And thanks, Donkey, for loving the channel, and Esta as well. Let's see. Got all my comments on my other screen over here. Folder management is a key weakness that would seemingly be an easy fix for Apple. Summing and folder stacks way too inflexible. They are pretty inflexible. And in fact, we're talking about why it's number one. And one of, I would say having inflexible track stacks as being, a main complaint would be a sign that Logic's pretty awesome, because that's a pretty small complaint. However, it is a complaint. In fact, one of the things that I hate about the stacks, when I want to freeze tracks, you can't freeze the stacks. That makes no sense whatsoever. How easy would it be to add a little icon and do the same process for all the audio inside the track stack and just freeze it? That makes no sense. So there's certainly some stuff with that that can be an issue. Again, I don't run into that all that much, because I am running projects that, this, like right in front of me or behind me here, this would be an example of a small project for me. But I may, even if I went twice as many tracks or 3 times as many tracks, I don't need to freeze things, because it's all going to run just fine with this, processor. We're looking at hardly any usage at all. One of them is going up a little bit, and that's probably, if I click on a non-input track here, I bet you all of those things would kind of go away in a second. That one's peaking, but that's probably because I'm live streaming more than anything. But the rest of this would be Logic on the left, and that's, pretty small with everything happening. It's like a small project, but you don't necessarily always need to have a big project for everything you do. Some projects you need to have a big project for, but this isn't one of those necessarily. Let's see, a couple more things from Rugby. Unloaded tracks in 10.4 was a game changer. Yeah. And it's only been a little while since they allowed us to actually, when we froze the tracks. So this drove me crazy for years with Logic, because you could freeze like in Nuendo and Cubase, and they did it right. So Nuendo and Cubase is always, I always look to them for a few of the smart things. They're very logical. And one of them was when you freeze the track, it would take the stuff off of your processor and out of the memory. And Logic didn't. It froze it to free up processing, but if you had like a big sample bank, it kept those samples in the memory, which makes no sense, right? It's just a second to unload them and reload them. Why not just take them out? They finally did that. But the other thing was selection-based processing. So if I do like a selection-based process here, it's like I can do it to that region, but then the history of that goes away. So I'm almost always doing this thing where I come through and I do track alternative. So if I know I'm going to be doing some selection-based processing, I come through and I create a new version of this, and then I can do all the processing. If I ever need to get back to the original, I just go back to the first alternative. This is how we used to do that in like Pro Tools too. But with Nuendo, you could always right click and say reopen up all of the things I did with the clip-based processing, and I want to change it, or I want to change the order of what I did, and it reprocesses it, and then you close it and it's in that file. So you always have like a history that you can go back and edit. I think that Logic would be nice to add that, but for that reason, I use selection-based processing about 0% of the time because it's just too many extra steps. Gigadad, thank you. You're awesome. Let's see, what else do we have here for things? So there's a question about the sequencer in Logic slowing down performance, and I haven't had that issue at this point. You're talking about the step sequencer, I'm assuming, and that thing has always been super snappy. In fact, one thing that I've really gotten into doing is having my iPad Pro sitting right in front of me and using that more than I'm using my mouse. It just works so well, having the multi-touch screen right there, and being able to put in the different patterns and things using fingers touching the screen instead of a mouse. I think it's a lot better way of doing it. The notation feature could also be so much better. And, yes and no. They have updated the notation feature over the years slowly, very small increments. If you look back through all of the different release notes, it's like they never like say in a meeting or demonstration or release, oh, we just did something with the notation system, but they're always doing small things to keep it running smoothly. And its weakness would be non-traditional styles of notation, but that would be Logic's probably weakness as a whole. I mean, it really wants to be in a tempo that's consistent, and it wants to do certain styles of music more than others. But the notation itself, I mean, you can do it. You just have to learn it. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing with anything in Logic. I do a lot of private lessons with people, and 8 times out of 10, anything that they're like, this is so, Logic can't do something I need. And I say, what is it? And they're like this. And I'm like, well, you can do it. It's just not intuitive. Let me walk you through like the 4 steps to do it. And then they're like, oh, okay. And then they do it like 50 times. And then it no longer is a hard thing. That's the same for learning anything really. But I think that Logic itself is something that it is deceptive. It feels intuitive and it feels easy on one hand, but some of the things are not intuitive or easy until you do them a bunch of times, and then they become easy. And that's the same with every workstation. I don't think any of them like a child could do, except GarageBand really is pushing that. There's someone left a comment not too long ago on one of my videos about GarageBand and it being kind of like the gold standard because of efficiency. And what they were saying was, you talk to someone who's made like a song in GarageBand or uses it for songwriting, they from turning it on to getting your ideas down is perhaps faster than any other workstation. Is it as powerful? Not necessarily. And it's not. I mean, it's not powerful. But efficiency often trumps the power that somebody can do with something. So you start there, and then you transfer it over to Logic, and then you keep going. I mean, you start with the efficiency, then you are fine with the power. I think that that's a great way to look at this whole system sometimes. Let's see. Did a feature request for a per channel phase flip. That would be, I mean, most people wouldn't even know what to do with it, with a phase flip button. But it is true. I mean, it would be nice to have one there. It seems like in terms of what is on the actual channel strip that, it's a pain to have to like add in a plugin to do that. But it's possible. It would be nice to have it there. So the phase switcher it's really important for anyone who's doing any kind of audio recording, multiple microphones, say like a drum kit or horn section or, things like that. We're using multiple microphones simultaneously, or homemade cables, or even sometimes store-bought cables that sometimes have wired incorrectly, or samples that were recorded by numbskulls. Things like that, anything that you need to be able to sometimes, if you're mixing things together and you're losing your bass content, then you need to be able to hit that phase and switch it around. Let's see. How to reach a plugin with an audio track via MIDI. Any workarounds? I mean, yes, there are certainly. I've made a number of videos about this exact issue about like sending a MIDI effect into an audio track. And there's ways to do this, um, primarily using like the IAC part of OS 10 and getting your MIDI in that way. It's not as easy. I'm really hoping that one of the next few versions of Logic, they'll add MIDI effects to all tracks. That would be the real easy thing to do. And I don't think that would be so difficult given the structure of Logic. But what do I know? MIDI effects are cool. I hope they add modulator. Yeah, so I was just saying the same thing. What do you expect in the next major version of Logic Pro? So we just got a next major version of Pro with the spatial audio functionality. And I got to tell you, so I've always been a huge proponent and user of spatial audio in general. I don't use Dolby Atmos that much. I primarily use ambisonics. I have an ambisonics microphone. I use ambisonics plugins. I prefer ambisonics because it does height that's up and down, and Dolby Atmos just does the upper hemisphere, and so you're kind of limited. And I do things. I've been working a lot with video game engines, and if you want to have sound effects that are down, you can't use Dolby Atmos. So I use ambisonics, but I just got the Apple AirPod Pros. And the spatial functionality on those things with the head tracking system, it's awesome. And if you haven't tried it out, I mean, these are under $200, and there's even a smaller version that now has the spatial audio stuff. I think that stuff, not just with Apple, but I think with everybody, I think that is one of the future things. And I think that it's really cool. So being able to do Dolby Atmos and Logic natively without having to buy anything else is really cool. What's going to come next for Logic? More of the same, I think, for the moment. Right now, they're doing a big push with all the hardware. Once the hardware comes, I mean, what they don't want to have happen is this. They don't want you to get a Mac Studio computer. I mean, they do. They want you to buy that. But they don't want you to get that and then be able to run Logic for the next 5 years. That's not what they want. What they're going to do is they're going to up the game on Logic and Final Cut. They're going to say, okay, now that people are getting these computers, let's give them a reason to get these computers. And so, Atmos was already one of those things. If you want to do spatial audio, you need a beefy computer. But I think they're going to say, like, let's buy some more plugins. Like, let's do some orchestral banks that are like 400 gigs big and make everyone get more RAM. So then they have to get the Mac Studio. So we should expect a lot more content, I think. And they're going to start getting more of these companies that do like dynamic control over frequencies and things. A lot of companies are doing that now. Like Soothe 2 is a plugin, and all of the major plugin developers are doing really cool things with dynamic processing and AI. I think that's going to be a thing that we'll go into next. What is a feature I want to see? I want to see a lot of features. But I don't want to. I think that the reason they have the iPad set up the way it is for a reason, but I want a version of Logic on my iPad. I want to be able to sit anywhere and then have a virtual studio room using one of their pair of headphones or any pair of headphones where I can sit and mix and be in that space anywhere. So I can sit, in a less than ideal place and work. That's what I want. You can already do that with a number of different solutions, but it's not easy. Let's see. I would really like a notation variant app of Logic from Apple. So you're talking about like the notation stuff broken off from Logic. I think that's what you mean. And I guess I kind of agree with that. My guitar sim is a pain. Okay, from Gigadeath. Awesome. Thank you again. Hope this is of general interest. Could you do something about pro bus techniques, like organizing and arranging within the mixer? And then Small Fry's asking what we mean by notation. That's actually like, so notation in this situation is the score editor. So being able to do that. And then we can talk about buses for a second as well. Sure, I think that's pretty useful. I see a lot of bus usage at the university where I teach. And you can see in this project right now, this is a pretty limited, which is weird. I think I need to adjust some buses. This is a in progress mix that I'm working on. So first of all, everyone's going to do this differently. And hello from Brazil to you too. But everyone does this differently. A lot of people like to start putting reverb on their projects from the very first moment. And Logic wants you to kind of do that if you're using its library stuff. So for instance, if I come down here, let's just create a new instrument track, and I come over to, something in the library. I'm like, ooh, the Big Dripper, right? Check it out. It added bus number 5 for me. Thank you, but I don't want bus number 5. They add like all of this routing to reverbs and things. And my first step always is to open up my little menu down here with patch merging and to turn off the sends so that when I load something from the library, it doesn't do that. It doesn't add a bunch of sends and things. I don't need 16 aux channels by loading up stuff from the library. So the patch merging is my first thing. I turn it all off. And then I wait. I usually get like the song fully fleshed out and then partially mixed before I start putting reverb on anything. I think reverb is not just overused. I don't think it's overused. I think it's used too early. And then if you use it too early, it can really muddy up what you're going to do with your compression, your EQ, your other effects. And so I try to minimize how much I'm using at the beginning in order to make sure that the rest of the mix is really getting cohesive. And then I start putting on reverb in places. Now, there are always exceptions to that. Sometimes a style of music really is reverb heavy, and you need to define that from the very beginning, and then you add that stuff later. But I tend to hold off on the reverb until I know that it's like everything else is kind of sitting pretty well. And so that's a personal thing. Now, with this, with all of the options we have, the number one mistake I see with students who are just learning music production is that they start putting reverb on individual tracks. And, I think that that's a mistake most of the time. In this case, I think I actually have a reverb on a subgroup, one of my track stacks. I have chroma-verb on the vocals here. That's pretty rare for me even here, but it looks like I did it. And that means that the vocals all have their own reverb. I could have done that with buses, but because I have them in a stack already, I just put them on the stack. And I think that works okay. But, we would typically have maybe 3 or 4 different send options for different reverb things. Some reverbs are really good at early reflections, and I might use those, or some, it's like I want to do some maybe for like the drum elements and then the rest for like another one for the other elements. But the more reverbs you're using, the more confusing this gets to the ear. You don't want to have like conflicting spaces that don't make sense to what people are hearing. And so I think really doing a minimal approach most of the time is going to be really smart. And so you just assign, maybe have 2 or 3 different reverbs on any given project, and have them for very specific reasons, and bus them to those channels. The other thing we use buses for, of course, would be in the recording process for headphone mixes. So that's a separate issue completely. We want to be able to send out a potentially separate headphone mix to the people who are performing, as opposed to what we're hearing on the other side in the control room. And part of that is because, like for instance, if you're working with a singer and you find that they're like whisper singing more than they normally would be, it could be that they're hearing too much of themselves in the mix compared to everything else in the headphones. And so you turn them down just a slight amount, and they'll start maybe projecting more. Sometimes you can do that with talking to them, and sometimes you have to actually just do it more subtly in the middle. But that balance makes a difference to how people perform, and so you want to adjust the bus amount for each one of those things. And so that's fine. In terms of which reverbs, I use, I really like Chromaverb for some things. I use it more on my synthesizers and instruments. I use Space Designer when it comes to like really crafting a good sounding room type reverb, but I don't use the default impulses anymore. I did a video about this a few years ago. One of my graduate students owned one of the Lexicon, like I can't remember which 960Ls or something, like the reverb that in its heyday was like $20,000 or something. And he bought it cheaper than that, but not much cheaper. And then he sold it. But before he sold it, he did an impulse response collection of every single patch. And when I first played a few of those, I was like, okay, I get it. I get why that particular reverb is amazing. And I get that sometimes the included presets in Logic aren't always amazing. But I use mostly those impulses now. And there's a few stage ones on there that just sound incredible. And it really does matter. So I try to actually curate what I'm using with the Space Designer to get better reverbs. And so just do a search on my channel for Lexicon Reverb and you'll find those. There's an available link. You can download them. We made them available for anyone who wants them. So go download them, and they're yours, and start using them. Because some of the default ones in Logic don't sound amazing. And then, so that was kind of a half answer. I think I'll make a video about that Gigadeath, all about more of a bus workflow thing, because I think there's some more nuances. It's like you have to kind of understand the difference between all the options here. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite things about this whole thing would be the Sends on Fader button. Let's turn that on. Because then you can actually mix the reverb levels using your faders down below. They go gold like this. And this becomes my reverb send. And then you can turn it back off to go back to your normal levels. And you can choose which of them, if you have multiples, you can choose which one you're working on here. I love this flip functionality. This is something that came from the console world before the software world. And it's really useful because then if you have your iPad out or if you have a control surface out, it actually flips to those faders, and so you can actually have a tactile experience. But I like being able to flip to those and look at them in a different way. But the rest of that, I mean, it's like, when do I use post pan? When do I use post fader? When do I use pre fader? When do I want an independent pan? Because an independent pan lets us pan to across a stereo bus to a stereo destination, what's going to be happening there. So I think that that's super useful. We can also copy the fader to send, which means if we have a bunch of faders in different places. We can start with those as levels. I mean, there's just a lot of little nuances with the busing that does make a difference. And then Aaron asks, what do I think about Logic Pro as a post-production DAW for video work? It's not my favorite. And it's not my favorite because of a few key things. One of them being that anytime we want to do selection-based processing, I explained this earlier in this video, but you can't go back and undo that type of work easily. So say I've got a bunch of sound effects and I want to start individually processing them, and then later I think, I should undo some of that. I wish I had done 3/4 of that amount on it. Then it's like a pain to get back to the original and change them. But I think Logic can handle it. I think you can do a lot with Logic in post-production. It has all the SMPTE tools. It has a relatively robust amount of automation tools. Nothing like, the big level of Pro Tools or Nuendo. Those automation systems blow the automation system of Logic out of the water. Just because it's like you can do like a pass-it automation and be like, write this to the, whatever I have right now, write that to the, the next clip, or from there back to the beginning of the project. Or there's all these like little tools that they have that Logic doesn't have as much as for mixing. And so you can mix in Logic for big project, but I think Pro Tools and Nuendo are still kind of top dogs at that. What else we got going on here? Logic is the best. I mean, I really do like it. And I think that this paired with the new things Apple's doing with its hardware, I think that we're sitting pretty. I think the Mac Studio computer being announced yesterday is going to kick a bunch of developers' butts into gear to get their stuff to be universal compatible with silicon. I think the writing is officially on the wall that if they want to keep making it without being universal, that they're total idiots. Because this isn't going away. This isn't a failed experiment. The M1 stuff with the new M1 Ultra is a successful experiment. And what they just did, they're saying that the new Ultra chip, M1 Ultra, is the integrated graphics on that are better than the 3080 in the Windows world. No one saw that coming. No one saw that was going to be any sort of pressure from Apple on the 3080 or 3090. And so, it's just like no one saw that coming, really. And yet here we are. And so a lot of those developers need to finally get off their cans. I know that they're probably working harder. They're a small team and it takes time. I've talked to more than one developer who says, it's just more than we thought it was going to be. It took us longer than we expected. But I got my M1 in 2020. We're in 2022. How long did it take you? You're still working on it. So it's like my sympathy slowly is waning for those groups. And I think, am I really going to be able to count on them for future stuff? Do I really want to invest money in a company and buy their stuff if they're unwilling to stay relevant with the new stuff that's coming out? Don't just take my money over time. That reminds me. Let me show you App Store here for a second. This is the version history for one of my favorite iPad apps called the Lemur. Has anyone used the Lemur before? This thing is awesome. I actually used a Lemur hardware device which was out before the iPads were invented. And they were like this touch interface that you could do amazing things with Logic and other workstations. And then the iPad came out and they're like, oh, come on, our timing couldn't have been worse. Because the iPad could do everything for half the price, you know what I mean? So then they released an app version, which was so cool. But the version history, up until yesterday, 5.3.5 was 4 years ago. I mean, give me a break. Let's update your software, right? They just came out with 5.4 yesterday, and I was just like, that's. I wish more people who early on developed for the iPad would continue to update, because we've seen a real stagnation. I don't think as many of these companies found this to be the money bag that they were hoping it was going to be. But this tool is awesome. It's like you can create any kind of control thing you want. It has like physics involved, and I mean, you can have like bouncing balls and things. But this brings me to one of the points. This is something that works on an M1, because they can run many of the iPad apps. So I can actually run this thing and attach it into Logic. And so let's turn the friction down on this. Come here. It's a little harder to run with the mouse, but so you can actually attach these bouncing balls into different parameters in Logic and do some amazing creative things with this. I mean, this thing is like a massive weapon if you're trying to do anything that's outside of the box. And attach it to your iPad. The iPad sends it to your computer. But this thing is so cool. On top of that, on top of this whole universe of making your own interface, you can actually build this so that you can attach it to 8 different destinations. So you can attach this to 8 different computers. You could attach this to 8 different pieces of software. One box could control Ableton. Another box could control Logic. I mean, this thing, I mean, the people behind this are genius. And they built something that I think highly goes unnoticed by most people. Because we don't necessarily need it all the time, but it's something that in certain circumstances, there's a reason why something like this could be really useful. And now I don't have to have an iPad attached to my M1 to use it. I can just buy the app and it loads up on my M1 and sends it over. In this case, I think I have it going through the IAC. Yeah, right here, IAC driver bus 1. And now with a new Logic on any of these channels, you can come in and say, I want IAC bus 1 to be the thing that attaches just to this one channel. So it doesn't go to all of the channels like it would have in the past. You can narrowly funnel this into one specific channel, which I think is amazing. Let's see, a couple more comments coming down. NKS support with Logic. Me too, I guess. I don't know if that's necessary, but it'd be cool. And then LA Winter, hoping Logic adds multi-band processing similar to the LR mid-side that is available now in Logic. Yeah, so I do think you're right. And that's going back earlier in our conversation about some of the stuff you can do with Studio One. I mean, there's a lot of potential for breaking some of those things out into multi-bands instead of just the mid-side stuff. The mid-side stuff, by the way, is cool. Most people don't use that in a way that is really beneficial. And some people who do use it use too much of it, and it causes all kinds of phasing havoc. And so you end up with no mono compatibility. Always remember, if you're doing stuff with mid-side to have on the metering a correlation, or use the multimeter with the correlation meter. And if this little down here in the bottom corner, which is probably right behind me right now, I'm going to move it over, where it says correlation here, if that is to the left, it means you're going to have cancellation if things ever get summed to mono. And keep in mind that Apple, just until a couple years ago, not even like decades, a couple years ago, the iPhone had a mono speaker output. And so mono compatibility was an issue there, and it's still an issue in other places. Specifically, like for instance, if someone is doing a lecture over Zoom, which happens all of the time still, or a meeting, and they play something, it gets summed to mono most of the time unless someone knows how to turn it to stereo. But if it's on the right side in the green, it's got a good, healthy stereo or mono compatibility. But if it's on the left side, things are going to get canceled. So use your meters. You won't be able to necessarily hear that. I can hear if I can tell when I'm listening on headphones if something's going to have an issue because it sounds a little bit like, whoa, it almost makes your head expand. It works with headphones, but the minute it gets summed, it gets canceled. So use your meters for sure. And then Grim Vulture, Logic is way better than all the other DAWs. We rule. I agree, obviously, for a lot of reasons. Small Fry, do you know anything about Reaper? Because I heard it's the most powerful DAW by far. Yes, I have a version of Reaper on one of my computers, and it is powerful in the sense that if you're a total nerd, that you'll be able to do lots of stuff with it. It's cheap. And there's like an extended demo period. And I hate it. Like, I don't hate DAWs. I don't hate very many DAWs. A lot of people who do spatial audio use Reaper because you get like the most control over the outputs and things. But the interface is less intuitive than everybody else's. And people say, well, just spend time and learn it, then it won't be intimidating. And I'm just like, yeah. I just don't like it. It's a biased opinion. It is very powerful and it is very affordable, but it doesn't. What I want with Logic. Let me explain my personal philosophy with this. What I want from Logic is something that gives me something in my process. So I don't use Pro Tools very often. It's sterile. I know how to use Pro Tools as good as anybody. I've taught it at the university for 15 years, and I used it 5 years before that, or 4 years before that. And so I know it as good as anybody. And when I use it, it's great. If I'm recording a band that is incredible and they have everything figured out, then Pro Tools is great. It's like a tape machine. I'm capturing this amazing performance. It's in there. I can add some effects as needed, do a couple small adjustments on things, and the project sounds great because the original source sounded great. When I use Logic and I'm making something, it's like playing a Stradivarius in some ways. It's like the instrument is a part of the performance. It adds something. It adds character. It adds sound. It adds stuff. Logic adds stuff. If you don't want things to get added to what you do, don't use Apple products like Logic. I mean, part of their goal is to do stuff, right? And so if I work with anybody who's not amazing, like high school garage band, right? Some group of kids who play after school and they want to record a single. I use Logic because Logic is going to elevate what they do. It's going to make it so that I can do easy drum replacements, easy timing fixes, easy pitch correction. All of those things are like just button clicks that I can get there nearly instantly. And it elevates. It also has, 30 to 40,000 loops and every single instrument and every single type that you can imagine. And so it's like, I want to create like a really cool sub-bass synth sound. It's like right there, I can do some traveling sonic soundscape using Sculpture, or I can take something and mangle it beyond recognition with Alchemy. All of those things become an extension of my like fingers, and I get to use something like that. Reaper is not that. It doesn't bring stuff to the table. It's very powerful, it's very flexible, but it's not part of my composition process. It's more like Pro Tools in that way, but it's like Pro Tools on steroids. It's like a tape machine that has 1,000 tracks, you know what I mean? It's like powerful in that way, but it's not going to help you in your beat making or your song creation or your creative process. That's not what they're talking about when they talk about power of Reaper. Anyway, probably more than you wanted to know. Okay. And I just read your second comment, Small Fry, about it not being user-friendly. It's stupid. It's not user-friendly at all, I don't think. It's certainly, and I don't take this the wrong way, because I include myself in this category. It's certainly nerd-friendly. Or geek friendly, and that's to typically where I would put myself, but I want to be on the musical side of things, not on the technical side, which is what Reaper mostly does. Not great at all for posts, especially video. Okay, cool. Marcelo says, thank you. You're welcome. Ellie Winter says, I would switch to Reaper except that it doesn't have the creation tools. And that's what I was just talking about. Then Bert Torino says, have you had any experience with Digital Performer? Yes, I actually made a tutorial for a company, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 years ago, all about Digital Performer. And I used it as a student at the university I was at. They used it in one of their labs. And I still think a lot of people, composers, still use Digital Performer. And Digital Performer, I think now works on Windows as well as Mac. It used to just be Mac only, I think. And Digital Performer was like the champion of Windows. Like Logic wants to be all in one window if it can ever help it. Digital Performer liked to be in like 60 windows, and they've kind of started unifying it to make it more user-friendly. But for the longest time, all you would need to install Digital Performer was like a code or something, and you could do that. And they didn't have a lot of security on it, except, and this is my personal theory, which is probably backed up by other people, the security of Digital Performer was owning the manual. Because if you didn't have the manual and you didn't know how to use Digital Performer, you were totally hosed. You couldn't figure out how to do anything in there. There was no help menu structure. There was no like digital manual. You had to have that paper manual to like learn how to do anything in that program. And it was insane. It was not an easy program to use, but again, like Reaper, it was very powerful. And I think it brought more to the musical side than, say, Reaper does. But some things in Digital Performer have always been good. And it's made by a company called Mark of the Unicorn. So, hello, I mean, who wouldn't want to use a piece of software that's made by a unicorn? But I think that you would find some of the things you like about Logic would be in Digital Performer, and some of the things that you like about Logic are not there. And so it'd be a real mixed bag. It'd be very hard for anyone using Logic to, I think, transition over to DP and be like really satisfied. But a lot of people who use DP go to Logic and they're like, oh, okay, this is cool. I like this. So cool program, really excelled at MIDI and compositional things in a way that not many of the other workstations really do. Ellie Winters, another comment. Is there a setting in Logic that will make stop automatically switching output devices to whatever device you just plugged in? Oh, I know what you're saying. Check this out. This has already happened to me twice on this live stream. Ready? My AirPod Pros. I'm going to open them up here and wait for it. Logic, are you going to do this now or are you going to stop doing it? Come on, don't just like leave me on the... See, this is how you get it to stop. You try to make it do it on call. Because just like 2 minutes ago, I was like, I opened it up and it's like, do you want to switch to use this? Do you want to switch to use this? Yeah, there it is right on the screen. Don't use. And here's the way to do it. When this is open, there's this little checkbox that says, do not show this message again for this device. And you click do not use. And so you just have to do that once for every device you ever plug in. And then it won't do it again the next time. I just haven't checked that for this device yet since they're brand new. So answer solved, but it's a pain in the butt the first time. For sure. I agree. Let's see. Charles Glenn, fellow Logic lover here, a bit unrelated. How is your live stream so crisp? Could you run through your AV, screen share, internet specs for the live streaming? Let me show you the main reason why this is the way it is. I'm going to just go to the internet speed test Google, and this is my internet. This is the download over Wi-Fi, and then I'll show you the upload in a second. Oh, that's actually lower right now than it should be. Ooh, I might need to switch my streams on my router. So that's my internet speed. Let's see if I run it again, if my upload goes any differently, if it's the same. That's the peaks there were a lot closer to what I normally get. So this is the one thing that's really changed for me in terms of my streaming, was changing my service to the gigabit offering. I'm in a new neighborhood in Denver, and they've rolled out fiber to the neighborhood, and so that was the first thing. And then buying a router that would actually like give me good coverage across the whole house. I also do a lot with Oculus Quest in my research at the university. And so now I can sit anywhere in my house and log on to my Windows. I do have a Windows computer. It's not like it's a bad thing, but it does all of my Oculus and immersive audio and video stuff. So I needed something that was going to give me a good connection between both. That's the main thing. And then the other part of this would be, you're going to see the end of the world here for a second. This is OBS, and I'm using OBS for everything else. And it's my mainstream thing. So I capture my display, my microphone, my audio from Logic comes over into here, and that does the rest with just basic settings. I could stream at 4K with my speeds and it would be fine, but YouTube still freaks out a little bit with that, so I just do 1080. Let's see. Ruby says, I have 4 speakers that I feel I'm underutilizing. As far as I understand, I can send individual to the front or rear, but not both. Is this what I should use spatial audio to do, or do I misunderstand? 4 speakers, are they set up around you like in a quad setup? I would need a ton more information about what you're asking. This is, so when I've now officially transitioned away from speakers in my home setup, just because I don't have the ability to like make a $1 million room on my premises, right? I don't have the desire or the need. I have studios in Denver that I either use, or we've got 5 really nice studios at our university facilities that I have access to whenever I need to. They're not perfect. They're teaching rooms, which means there's chairs for students, which do affect the acoustics. And so I wouldn't say that they're like perfect, but I know them since I've been using them now for, almost 20 years. And so I use those, but at home, I have switched over to a really good pair of headphones that I'm wearing right now. And I use all of the Waves NX technology. You can see on top of my headphones, I've got the NX head tracker. I love this technology. I think it's not gimmicky. I think it's amazing. And it removes room acoustics. And I have the CLA, the Lord Algae stuff. I have, all of them, I think. Every time they release a new one, I go out and buy it. I've got Abbey Road, which does stereo and surround sound. I've got the Ocean Way, Nashville, the Lord Algae stuff, and then the original NX. And I expect them to come out with more of those. I think that they're just incredible. Every mix. I've mixed things and put them straight up to clients, and everybody's happy. So that's the sign. I think that's the key indicator that people are happy with the mixes that come from them. And so I'm happy with the mixes that come from them. But it also lets me do ambisonics, because the NX system can do head tracking in 360. And so I can actually do full 360 ambisonics before I upload something to YouTube and hear what it's going to sound like. Let's see. Mine just switches without the permission box. I bought sound source. Ellie Winder, maybe are you on the latest version of OS? I wonder if that's a thing. So I'm on the very latest OS 10, and maybe they just added that in or something. I don't know. It is annoying. Trust me, there's been moments where that has totally screwed me over. Let's see. Is it safe to save your Logic sounds to an external hard drive? Yeah, and I don't run anything off my main drive dock, so I run everything off an external drive. Speaking of external drives, I've said this before in a few different videos, but you should all be really aware. Let me just type this in. I don't remember where I have it saved. Black Magic. This is a free disk speed test utility. Ooh, my target disk. I need to clean off my main drive. Looks like, but this is a free thing you get on the App Store, and you can choose. So I've got these external drives. Here's my let's see, Extreme Pro. This is the speed test for that, and about 380 to 400 MB per second is pretty good. I mean, it's good enough to run most types of footage, which means audio is going to be fine. This is an SSD drive, and that's the kind of speed you'd be looking for. Just to show you, I've got like this archive drive that's more for backing things up than for running things. And it's like a more traditional like laptop style drive inside of an enclosure. And it's like below 100 regularly. So, I mean, that's like the old, you want to make sure you have the right drive. Not just any SSD. I actually have one of my SSDs, this one here. It's an SSD and it gets like 35. It's not, that's how fast it goes. It's not like that's a mistake, but you can have one of the fast drives and a slow cable, and you'll get these speeds. So you have to make sure you have the right cable, the right speed drive, and then I recommend doing it. Simple answer. But I'm always checking those things to make sure that every piece of the chain is giving me full speed of stuff. And then we're about to wrap up here because I got other stuff to do today. But let's see. Sir Lollipop Man says, what's the best workflow for setting the grid to an unquantized recording rather than recording and quantizing to the grid? I'm not going to answer that question here, but if you go on my channel and look at the video I uploaded yesterday, that's the best way. I just literally did a video about the flex and follow functionality in Logic. I'm enjoying the comments. Yes. Okay. So Rugby says 4 speakers, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. Can I send one track to all 4? Yeah. If you set so inside Logic and under your project settings, audio, you can set your surround format to quadraphonic, and then you can mix, like your surround panner will then mix to those 4 speakers, and you can do all of that with just those 4. So quadraphonic was a format that has worked. We typically have 5.1, which means that there's a center channel to help ground dialogue and other things in the front, and the 0.1 is a subwoofer channel. But quadraphonic is a format you can use, although it's less traditional, and I wouldn't use it necessarily with spatial audio, but it's possible, sure. The Reverend Ask Clown says, don't buy Mac Studio with M1 Ultra. I agree with this comment, by the way. In 3 months, they will introduce the new M1 Mega Super Stupendous and release a new Mac Pro with it. Yeah. yeah, I'm not going to buy any of these right off the bat because I have an M1 Mac Mini that is going to last me for a period of time until they release the next version of Logic, which requires you to have like a port on your forehead to be able to hear the music. So you have to plug into your brain, and this M1 won't be compatible with the brain interface, and so I'll have to upgrade it. Ellie Winter says, I really like using Sound Source because it lets me use my waves. Yes, I know. Cool. That's cool. Just reading through all these, fairly new to Logic, but I appreciate this live stream. Hoping for more. Let's do more. I'm going to do more of these this month. March, even though we're already, this is my second live stream of March and we're on the 9th. I'm going to try to do a couple of these every week all month long because I'm tired of making other videos. And this is a nice change of pace for me. So I can just make a video, talk to all of y'all, and, at the end of the day, I can hit stop and go on with my life and not edit the video or post it up or make another thumbnail, although I had to make one for this. But it's just a little different pace. So I actually like this interaction more than just the stale thing from other stuff. So Jerome was asking what I use for traveling or not at home. So for instance, this summer I'm going to be in the Czech Republic with students on a study abroad, and I will have my laptop, which is a 2016 MacBook Pro. It's good enough for that, even though it's like, that's 6 years old now. And I have an iPad Pro, so if I need to do any kind of music stuff, I'll use GarageBand and then import that into Logic to continue when I get back. But the Mac Mini is small enough. I've taken I've had Mac Minis in my workflow for a long time. There were a few summers before the pandemic where I would spend like 4 or 5 weeks in Beijing, China. And I would just take a Mac Mini with me. They would have like a little flat screen TV in the room with HDMI, and I would just plug that in and borrow a keyboard and a mouse from somebody in their office. I mean, they have 1 billion keyboards and mice in China, so there's plenty to go around. So I just bring the Mac Mini with me. It would visit its homeland, and we would have a good time, and then I would just bring it back with me. So they're actually pretty portable. And I'm out of time. I think we're going to pull the plug on this. There were a couple other good questions. Niles, I'm sorry I'm not getting to your question about package of beats into Logic, but let's call this one a good day. Thanks everybody for watching. I'm shooting for noon again for my next stream, but I'll post up a notification. So make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, so that way if you want to do another one of these and get into some other topics, that you'll be aware of it. But when I started this an hour and 14 minutes ago is about the same time I'm going to be starting future ones. It's just a really good time for me to do this. And so thanks everybody for tuning in, and get the hell off my live stream. You're no longer welcome. I'm just kidding. You're always welcome. But I will see you all later.